She was screaming when I walked in. Not the ordinary screaming of a child who wants attention or a toy or 5 more minutes before bedtime. This was the screaming of a 4-year-old who had been crying so long her body had forgotten how to do anything else. Raw. Guttural. The kind of sound that does not come from frustration. It comes from grief. From a wound so deep that a child does not have the language to explain it, so she just opens her mouth and lets the pain exit in the only form available to her: sound. Pure, unfiltered, devastating sound. 11 women had tried before me, 11 nannies, the best in Seoul, certified, trained, recommended by agencies that supplied childcare to presidents and diplomats and families whose last names appeared on the sides of buildings. 11 women walked into that penthouse. 11 women walked out. The longest lasted 6 days. The shortest lasted 45 minutes. And I was number 12. The one nobody expected to last past lunch. A black woman from Savannah, Georgia, with 2 years of unlicensed experience that the agency never counted because it did not come with a certificate or a stamp or the kind of credentials that look important on paper and mean. Nothing in a room where a child is drowning. But here is what none of them knew. I knew why she was crying. I knew because I recognized the sound. I had made that exact sound once. In a hospital hallway in Savannah when I was 5 years old, and a nurse in blue scrubs knelt in front of me and told me that my mother was not coming back. And no amount of professional expertise or behavioral methodology could touch that sound. The only thing that could reach a child trapped inside that kind of grief was someone who had been trapped inside it themselves and somehow found the way out. My name is Josephine Calloway, and the man who hired me, the man whose daughter had not stopped crying in 8 months, the man they call the Iron Gate of Gangnam because nothing and no one gets through him without his permission, is Shin Tae-jun. And this is the story of how a little girl's tears became the bridge between 2 people who had no business finding each other and no intention of letting go once they did. I came to Seoul the way most dreams begin, with desperation wearing optimism as a disguise. Savannah had given me everything it could. A grandmother who raised me after my mother died. A voice my grandmother said could convince God to change his mind about the weather. A high school diploma and 2 years of community college before the money evaporated like rain on hot pavement, and a stubborn refusal to believe that the zip code you were born in gets to decide the zip code you die in. My grandmother raised other people's children her whole life with the same ferocity she raised me. She gave me 2 things before she passed: her voice, low and warm and impossible to ignore, and a philosophy that I carry in my bones like marrow. Every child who is crying is asking one question, Josie, the same question: am I safe? You answer that question and the crying will stop. But you cannot answer it with words. You answer it with your presence. You answer it by staying. Seoul was a friend's idea. English tutoring for wealthy Korean families who wanted their children bilingual by kindergarten. I spent 2 years working with Korean children, learning the language until I dreamed in it, learning the kids until I loved them, and then the agency called with the job nobody wanted. The woman's voice was clipped and exhausted, and carried the particular tension of someone delivering news they do not expect to survive. We have 1 more placement. It is difficult. The child is 4. She lost her mother 8 months ago. She is not adjusted. The father is prominent, very prominent. 11 candidates have failed. You are the only person remaining on our active roster. I took the job. The car they sent was black and heavy and driven by a man who did not speak and did not need to. We drove through Gangnam, past buildings that looked like they were competing with each other to touch the sky, and stopped at one that had already won. The lobby was marble and silence. The elevator required a keycard and a code, and the kind of clearance that told me the man who lived at the top of this building did not simply value privacy. He required it the way other people require oxygen. The doors opened into a penthouse that looked like a museum exhibit about wealth. Everything white. everything clean, everything positioned with geometric precision, and cutting through all of that curated perfection like a siren through fog was the sound of a child crying. A woman met me in the foyer, mid-50s. Severe, she introduced herself as Mrs. Yoon, the head of household staff, and her expression communicated with brutal efficiency that she had already mentally processed my failure and was simply waiting for the timeline to confirm it. The child's name is Shin So-woon. She is 4. Her mother passed 8 months ago. Since then, she has refused attachment to any caregiver. She does not sleep through the night. She does not eat consistently. She cries for extended periods and cannot be consoled through standard methods. Mr. Shin has approved your trial period. You have 1 week. She led me down a hallway. The crying grew louder with every step. We stopped outside a door painted white like everything else in this pristine, sterile, beautiful prison. Mrs. Yoon opened it, and there she was, Shin So-in, 4 years old, sitting in the center of a room filled with toys she had not touched, and books she had not opened, and a bed she had not slept in. Her face was swollen and red. Her small body was shaking. She was wearing a pink dress that someone had clearly put on her with care, and her shoes were on the wrong feet, which meant she had dressed herself that morning because she would not let anyone close enough to help. She looked at me through her tears with eyes that were simultaneously ancient and impossibly young. Eyes that had seen something no 4-year-old should see and were asking a question she did not have the words for. Mrs. Yoon stepped forward. Sona, this is your new... I held up my hand. Mrs. Your new... Yoon stopped, looked at me with an expression balanced between offense and curiosity. I did not approach So-won, did not kneel down, did not smile, did not perform any of the standard engagement protocols that the 11 women before me had undoubtedly deployed with professional precision and absolute futility. I sat down on the floor, 6 feet away from her. Cross-legged, hands in my lap, I made myself small and still and present, not reaching, not performing, just there. And I began to hum. Not a children's song, not a lullaby. The song my grandmother hummed while she braided my hair on Sunday evenings. A hymn without words that lived somewhere between gospel and grief. A sound that knew what it meant to lose someone and keep living anyway. Not past the grief, inside it. Because sometimes the grief is the last room where love still lives and you are not ready to leave that room yet. So-yin's crying did not stop, but it changed. The raw, desperate edge softened. The screaming dropped to sobbing. The sobbing dropped to whimpering. She was listening, not to me, to the sound, to something in the frequency of that hymn that her 4-year-old body recognized even if her 4-year-old mind could not name it. I hummed for 17 minutes. Mrs. Yoon stood in the doorway frozen. The staff beyond the hallway went silent. The entire penthouse held its breath. Then So-jin moved, not toward me, sideways, a small lateral shift across the carpet. 2 inches, maybe 3. The distance a wounded animal moves when it has not yet decided whether the presence nearby is dangerous or safe, but has decided it is tired enough to find out. I kept humming, did not move, did not reach, did not breathe wrong. She shifted again, closer, 2 more inches. And then she spoke. The first word anyone in this household had heard from her in weeks that was not a scream. Yuma. Mama. My heart shattered into powder. Silently. Behind my ribs where no one could see the damage, I leaned forward. Slowly, the way you move toward a bird that will fly away if you blink too fast, and I whispered in her ear, in Korean, softly enough that only she could hear. I know, baby, I know. I lost my mama too, and it hurts so much that your whole body wants to scream because screaming is the only thing big enough to hold how much you miss her. But I am here, and I am not going anywhere. And you do not have to stop crying. You can cry as long as you need to. I will just sit right here beside you while you do, because nobody should have to cry alone. Not ever. Not even once. She looked at me. Through the tears and the swelling and the exhaustion of 8 months of grief that no adult had been able to touch. She looked at me and she saw something. She crawled into my lap, pressed her wet face into my shoulder, wrapped her small arms around my neck, and she held on with the desperate strength of a child who has finally found something she is not willing to let go of. I held her, rocked her, hummed my grandmother's hymn into her hair, and within 4 minutes, Shin Seon was asleep. For the first time in weeks, according to Mrs. Yoon, who was crying silently in the doorway, asleep, in the arms of a stranger who was not a stranger at all, but the only person in this penthouse who spoke the language of her grief, because she had learned it at the same age in a hospital hallway, in fast. Savannah, when the world took her mother and gave her nothing in return except the knowledge that love does not protect you from loss, it just makes the loss unsurvivable, and then you survive it anyway. He was standing in the hallway when I looked up. Shin Tae-yoon. I did not know how long he had been there. Minutes, maybe longer. He was still wearing his suit, charcoal, perfectly fitted. The uniform of a man who commands rooms and destroys obstacles and operates in a world where sentiment is a vulnerability and vulnerability is a death sentence. But his face was the face of a father who has watched his daughter scream for 8 months and been unable to stop it, who has held her and hired for her and built a fortress around her and none of it worked, who has fought wars and won and discovered that the one battle he cannot win is the one being fought inside a 4-year-old body that misses its mother. His eyes were wet. He did not wipe them, did not hide them. He just stood there and let his daughter see what she had never seen, her father breaking. And that single act of unguarded honesty told me more about Shin Tae-yoon than any dossier or rumor or reputation ever could. He looked at his sleeping daughter in my arms. He looked at me. He pressed his lips together and nodded once. Then he turned and walked away, and I heard a door close down the hall, and behind that door, I heard a sound that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. A man crying. Not the polished, restrained crying of someone managing an emotion. The ragged, ugly, gasping crying of a man who has been holding his breath for 8 months and has finally found a reason to exhale. I stayed, not for the 1-week trial. I stayed because Soin's hand wrapped around my finger that first night, and when I tried to gently pull away, she gripped tighter in her sleep and whispered the word again. Iyama. And I understood that this child was not looking for a nanny. She was looking for someone who would stay, just stay. The way my grandmother stayed for me when staying was the only language I could hear. I slept on her floor that first week. She woke at 2 a.m. screaming, and I hummed her back to sleep every single night. Then one morning, she sat at the breakfast table, small bites, eyes locked on me between every spoonful like she was checking I had not evaporated. And the 3rd week, she did something nobody in that penthouse expected. She laughed, a small sound, fragile as new glass, and Mrs. Yoon dropped a tray in the kitchen because she had not heard that sound in 8 months, and the shock of it overwhelmed her hands. Taejin watched all of it, from doorways, from the edges of rooms, always present, never interrupting. He observed the way his daughter unfolded in my presence, the way a man watches water return to a river he believed had dried up permanently. He began coming home earlier, not dramatically, 30 minutes at first, then an hour, then 2. He would sit in the living room while I read to Soin in English and Korean, alternating languages mid-sentence, the way my grandmother alternated between English and the Gula phrases she inherited from her mother. Soin would sit in my lap, and Taejin would sit across the room, and the distance between us was 10 feet and shrinking by the day, though neither of us acknowledged the geometry. One evening, 5 weeks in, Soin fell asleep on the couch between us, her head on my thigh, her feet on his knee, her body bridging the gap her heart had already closed. She has not had a nightmare in 9 days, he said. His voice was quiet. Not the commanding quiet of a man who runs an empire. The fragile quiet of a father who is afraid to say something hopeful out loud because hope in his experience is just grief that has not revealed itself yet. She is healing, I said. Children are resilient when they feel safe. He looked at Soan, then at me, and the question in his eyes was so raw it almost had a sound. How did you know? What to say to her? How to reach her when no one else could? Because I was her. Same age, same loss. My mother died when I was 5, and everyone around me tried to fix the grief, tried to distract me from it, tried to hurry me past it, but my grandmother did not try to fix anything. She sat beside me, she hummed, she let the grief exist without trying to evict it. And Soan has been surrounded by people trying to stop her tears, when what she needed was someone willing to sit inside the tears with her until she was ready to come out on her own. He was quiet for a long time. The city pulsed beyond the windows. Soan breathed softly between us. The whole world reduced to this room and these 3 people and the silence that connected them. "Thank you is insufficient," he said. "But I do not have a word that is sufficient. In Korean or any other language, you do not need a word. You need to be here. That is what she needs from you. Not protection, not perfection. Presence. She needs to know that the people she loves are not going to disappear. And you come home to her every night now, and that is doing more for her healing than anything I could ever whisper in any language." Something crossed his face that I had never seen before. Not on him, not on any man with that much power and that many walls. The expression of someone who has just been told something they desperately needed to hear by someone they did not expect to hear it from. Not gratitude, recognition. The shock of being seen by someone who had no obligation to look that closely and looked anyway. Weeks turned. So-yoon started sleeping through the night, started playing. Started singing fragments of my grandmother's hymn in a 4-year-old soprano that made Mrs. Yoon cry every single time without exception. She called me Josie Annie, which is not what you call the help. It is what you call family. And when Taejin heard it for the first time, he set down his coffee cup very carefully and left the room, and I heard him breathe in the hallway. Just breathe. Like the sound of his daughter claiming someone as family was an answered prayer. He had not been brave enough to pray out loud. 3 months and Soan drew a picture. 3 figures holding hands. A tall one in a dark suit, a small one in a pink dress, and one in between with brown skin and black hair and a smile that took up half the page. She brought it to dinner and held it up with both hands and said, "This is our family." Taejun looked at the picture, looked at me, looked back at the picture. And the mask he wore every day, the iron gate, the fortress, the impenetrable architecture of a man who survives by never showing weakness, all of it came down, not with a crash, with a whisper. The way a wall surrenders when someone removes the one brick that was holding everything in place, and the entire structure realizes it is tired of standing. After Soan was asleep that night, he found me in the kitchen. I was washing her cup. The small purple one with stars on it that she refused to drink from any other vessel. He stood in the doorway, hands at his sides, no suit jacket, sleeves rolled up, looking less like the most dangerous man in Seoul and more like a father standing at the edge of something he was not sure he was allowed to want. "She drew you into our family," he said. "She is 4. She draws what she feels. She is the most perceptive person I have ever known. She has been watching me watch you for 3 months, and she drew what she sees." The kitchen went very quiet. The water running over my hands was suddenly the loudest sound in the building. "What does she see?" I whispered. "She sees her father standing in doorways, sitting at the edges of rooms, coming home 2 hours earlier than he has in years. She sees a man who has not known where to put his heart since her mother died, because every safe place was destroyed. And the only new one that has appeared is a woman from Savannah who hums hymns and speaks Korean and held his daughter when the entire world could not." The cup was clean. Had been clean for a while. My hands were just holding it because letting go meant turning around, and turning around meant standing 3 feet from a man who had just said the most honest thing anyone had ever said to me, and I was not entirely sure my legs would hold. I turned around. He was closer than 3 feet. He had moved without sound, the way he does everything. Deliberate, patient, irreversible. "I am not a safe man," he said. "My world is not a safe man," he said. "My world is not a safe world. And you deserve safety and softness and a life that does not require security details and locked elevators and the constant awareness that the man beside you has enemies who would use the people he loves as pressure points." I looked up at him. This man, this fortress, this iron gate who opened for a 4-year-old girl and a hymn from Savannah, and a woman who sat on his floor and did not reach. "Your daughter taught me that the only question that matters is whether someone will stay. She already knows my answer. Now you need to hear it too." His hand found mine. Carefully, like he was picking up something made of glass that he could not afford to shatter. His fingers closed around my fingers, and his grip was warm, and his pulse was visible in his wrist, and it was racing. The most powerful man in Seoul standing in his kitchen with a heartbeat he could not control because a woman from Savannah was holding his hand and not letting go. He pressed his forehead against mine, eyes closed, breathing, just breathing. The way you breathe when you have been underwater for so long that air itself feels like grace. Soen was standing in the hallway. Neither of us knew how long she had been there. She was holding her purple cup and wearing her pajamas with the wrong buttons done up, and she looked at us with those ancient 4-year-old eyes, and she smiled. She walked over, raised her arms. He lifted her with one arm, and she settled against his chest and reached for me with her free hand, and I stepped in, and her small palm pressed against my cheek. And she said, "Josie Annie, stay forever." Okay. I looked at her father, he looked at me, and his eyes answered before his mouth could. "Okay, baby," I said. "Okay, now, if you are still here." If this story reached inside your chest and held something you did not know needed holding tonight, subscribe, hit that button, turn on the notifications. Because the stories on this channel are not background noise, they are not content, they are mirrors held up in dark rooms. They are the sound of someone humming when a child is crying and the whole world going still because something real is happening and real things deserve witnesses. Drop a comment. Tell me which moment broke you. The scream, the hymn, the whisper, the drawing, the purple cup, the kitchen. Tell me. I read every single one because every comment is proof that this story found the exact person it was searching for tonight. You are not here by accident. You are here because something in you recognized something in this, and that recognition is not coincidence, it is resonance. And resonance is just love arriving in a frequency you were already tuned to receive. And if you are sitting somewhere right now holding grief you have not been able to put down, if you are in your own room wondering if anyone in this enormous world will ever sit beside you in the hard parts without trying to rush you through them, let me tell you what my grandmother told me, what I told Soen, what I am telling you right now with everything I have. You do not have to stop crying. You just have to let someone stay. See you in the next one.